Within 2 generations of the opening of Louisiana, the American language had been reborn. No legislator sitting in a library in one of the eastern states could have hoped to arrest its exuberant progress. It's a fact that the biggest author of the language is a non. This was the democratic language that Adams had foreseen, but democracy meant that everyone threw in their 2 cents worth, and the old conservative values were trampled in the movement west. And never quicker than when gold was discovered in them thar hills. Gold fever brought tens of thousands of people from the eastern states, and their letters home were loaded with new words. Prospector was one. They wrote about how they'd staked their claim, about how they hoped that gold dust would pan out of the water that they were sieving, or they would strike it lucky or strike it rich and produce a bonanza, which came from the Spanish word for fair weather. And for the first time, a surefire investment became known colloquially as a gold mine. And the gold rush gave us 2 words that became far more famous in the 20th century. When a certain Levi Strauss started to make hard-wearing clothes for miners, he used a cloth called jean fustian, originally made in Genoa. Levi's and jeans have been as American as Stars and Stripes ever since. The arrival of the railroad was what really opened up the country, and it created the industry that gave the West its most characteristic vocabulary. It was a certain Joseph McCoy who had the idea of driving cattle often hundreds of miles to railheads so that they could be exported to the markets back east. Previously, they'd only been butchered for local use. Overnight, McCoy became immensely rich. So rich, the story goes, that other envious souls used to try to pass themselves off as the man who had such a simple but brilliant idea. And so he developed the habit of introducing himself to strangers as the real McCoy. He gave the world a catchphrase, and he also gave it the cowboy. English had known the word cowboy since the 18th century, but now it took on a new currency and a new meaning. McCoy's brainwave turned the cattle industry into a license to print money and the cowboy into a national icon. Cowboys had been working near the Mexican border for years, picking up Spanish words, which now drove north with them. Ranch comes from the Spanish, as does corral, where horses or cattle were penned. Mustang, bronco, and the more humble burro, the chaps, sombrero and poncho they might wear, the cinch that secured the saddle, the lariat and the lasso they used to rope cattle, the sierras, mesas and canyons they rode across, the cries of vamoose and pronto, the stampede that they feared, and the rodeo where they drove the cattle together. All came from Spanish. The language of the West has become the standard idea of what American English is like, completely overtaking the proper speech of the East. And the man who is virtually single-handedly responsible for this was one of the greatest showmen and boosters of them all. He was William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill, and he chose to be buried here, on the hills above Denver, where the Rockies rise steeply out of the Great Plains. He turned the frontier experience into an epic entertainment, Buffalo Bill's Wild West. The extravaganza featured live elk and buffalo, real Indians attacking a stagecoach, sharpshooting displays, musical cowboys in spotless outfits that had never seen a cattle drive, and a reenactment of Custer's last stand at Little Bighorn, in which Buffalo Bill himself arrived on the scene just too late to save the day. It was nonsense, and it was a smash across America and Europe for 30 years, long after Indian resistance had ended and the last buffalo herd had been massacred. It created a vogue for the language of the West and began a line of Western myth that kept that language alive through countless books and films. And the dreams of luxury and optimism became an enduring fantasy of a Western El Dorado, an Eden, somewhere over the rainbow, or at least the next county line. It's all there in a little song about the hobos, another good frontier word, who rode the railways west in search of their own American dream.
In the big rock candy mountains, you never change your socks, and the little streams of alcohol come a-trickling down the rocks. The brakemen have to tip their hats, and the railroad bulls are blind. There's a lake of stew and a whiskey, too. You can paddle all around them in a big canoe in the big rock candy mountains.
But there was another group of Americans who'd never been invited to share that dream, the black slave population of the South. And they spoke about their experiences in a very different language.
I'll see you all this coming fall in the big rock candy mountains.
This is Sullivan's Island, a little patch of land in Charleston Harbor off the coast of South Carolina. It was the first taste of America for hundreds of thousands of immigrants in the 18th and 19th centuries. But the immigrants who came through here hadn't chosen the American dream of a better life. They had been sold into slavery. Sullivan's Island was a holding pen for imported slaves. Between half and two-thirds of them entered America here, before being sold on mainly to work on the cotton plantations. There's no Statue of Liberty here, just this plaque, erected in 1999 to commemorate their arrival. They came here from the countries of West Africa and from plantations in the Caribbean. Slaves who spoke different languages were put together on the same sea voyage here to stop them plotting together to seize control of the ship. So on ship and on shore, there was a great babel of languages. The slaves had to find a tongue in which to talk to one another and to their masters. It was English, but English very heavily influenced by African ways of talking.